Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the FSDC Industry Exchange Series. My name is Rocky Tong, and I'm the Director and Head of Policy Research for the Financial Services Development Council. Today, we are announcing a report titled Connecting Data, Establishing Hong Kong as a Cross-Boundary Financial Data Hub. Well, data is the new gold, or the new oil, they say, and almost a cliche, really. But it is true. It is an asset because it's scarce, and accessibility to assets is always limited. Therefore, we are looking into how we can allow people to better have better access to different data, especially in a cross-boundary or the cross-border manner. Today, we have invited a very distinguished panel, including Ms. Larina Wang, Executive Director and Head of Digital and Innovation Hong Kong and GBA Institutional Banking Group of DBS Bank. Mr. Lei Ming Chang, Senior Vice President of Ant Group, who is also the working group leader of our project. Mr. William G, Advisor and PwC Hong Kong, and he is also a very instrumental part of our working group. Then, of course, we have our very own Dr. King Yao, Executive Director of the FSDC. The panel will be talking about different areas covered in our paper. But before that, it will be Mr. Lei Ming Chang who will be walking us through our key recommendations. Lei Ming, over to you.
Thank you, Rocky. Thank you, everyone. With great privilege, I was able to get involved in this research project that has, we hope, important impact on the financial service industry in Hong Kong. Now, the research paper is prepared really to address some of the main pain points facing Hong Kong's financial service industry. Those pain points are lack of specific legislation to facilitate cross-border boundary data transfers. Companies with operations in mainland China and Hong Kong struggle to integrate their businesses. The changing regulatory landscape of data protection give rise to unintended uncertainties. The cost and resources to meet legal requirements for cross-boundary transfer of data is significant. The last but not least, business experience challenges to acquire and nurture homegrown and foreign talent. Now, with this in context, the research project has gathered many of the distinguished experts in the area, and with very active participation and hard work of the research team of the council. Today, we are very pleased to release the paper. The paper is focused on 6 sets of the key recommendations. I will go through one by one. Next page, please. The first set of the recommendations are to provide clarity on Section 33 of the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance, PDPO. The FSDC's recommendations include a clear legal framework that spells out mechanisms for cross-border data flow that can facilitate international data transfers, demonstrates a jurisdiction's adequacy of data protection, and crucial for establishing a legal framework for data integration with the GBA. The laws of Section 33 that govern data transfer were first created decades ago prompting a need to review and potentially update the rules to ensure they remain fit for purpose. And also consider mandating companies of a certain scale or companies handling large amount of personal or sensitive data to design a data protection, designate a data protection officer, DPA, to take on the responsibility of ensuring their organizations comply with all the relevant data laws. The second set of recommendations are designed to strengthen data governance and policy coordinations within the GBA. The recommendations include to establish white and gray list to facilitate cross-boundary data transfers, to explore the feasibility of cross-boundary data sharing through conducting pilot projects, and to develop a set of GBA data governance standards. The third set of recommendations is to formulate a standard contractual clauses for cross-boundary data transfers within the GBA. The recommendations include that the government should actively work with relevant counterparts in mainland China and Macau to come up with a set of standard contractual clauses that meet the regulatory requirements of each of those jurisdictions for businesses to overcome the challenges of complying with the various data regulations across the region. The government can consider drawing references from the ASIM's model contractual clauses for cross-border data flows to formulate such model contractual clauses. Introduction of standard contractual clauses helps reduce the negotiation and compliance cost and the time for business while ensuring personal data is protected when it is transferred abroad. The fourth set of recommendations are to set up a third-party certification agency to conduct conformity assessment on cross-boundary data transfers within the GBA. The recommendations include the following. The government should consider establishing an independent and a professional organization or leveraging existing professional organizations, if practical, to provide certifications to companies with robust data governance frameworks as trusted data users or processors for cross-boundary transfer within the GBA and beyond in future. This certification organization should be entrusted to issue certifications by making reference to a set of data governance principles. The organization should also have the capacity to handle various types of certifications, including certifications relating to AI adoption. For such an organization to be qualified as a certification agency, one should have sufficient expertise and experience of legal knowledge of systems of mainland China and Hong Kong, as well as recognized by regulators of both sides. Alternative solutions also is to set up professional bodies respectively in mainland China and Hong Kong with endorsement from their corresponding authorities and mutual recognition from authorities of the other side. The fifth set of recommendations are to explore the use of new technologies to enable cross-boundary data transfers within the GBA. The recommendations include looking at some of the examples and practices adopted by other jurisdictions in this respect, includes Shenzhen and Singapore's blockchain-based transactional trade network, Europe's Gaia X infrastructure, and user-held data model and self-sovereign identity that are used by other jurisdictions. And those are the sort of platforms and technologies that have been adopted by other jurisdictions that we can that leverage new technology, that we can look at it and see whether that would be fit for our purposes. The last but not least set of recommendations are really designed to attract and cultivate talents with technological and digital related skill sets. The recommendations include to adjust the visa application process for foreign specialists in technology area, data analytics, and other new technology relating to data. To attract talents from the mainland GBA cities with the population of 70 million to home in the GBA, we certainly should look at the talents in the GBA area cities first. And also to explore closer collaboration between Hong Kong universities and industry players to train students for their critical thinking and problem-solving abilities. And we also recommend collective and coordinated efforts between the government and the industry players. So those are the sort of, in highlight, the recommendations we have made in the research paper. And I will stop here, and we will have more Q&A opportunities to highlight some of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lei Ming, for the very concise presentation of our high-level recommendations for the government and relevant regulators to consider. So now let's wait until our panelists will turn on their camera, and then we will be able to start our panel discussion in just a bit. That's Irina and King and William. All four panelists have now joined us, and so good. King, I would like to direct my first question to you. There are a lot of important subjects that FSDC is studying, but why do we consider it important for Hong Kong to position itself to be the financial data hub for the Greater Bay Area, and why now? And perhaps you can also elaborate a little bit on why, what kind of competitive advantage does Hong Kong possess?
Thank you, Rocky. Well, first of all, let me thank Lei Ming and the working group for putting together this insightful paper, because it is very timely. You mentioned earlier on that data is the new oil. In fact, I would say data is the oxygen to finance nowadays, because oil you can find substitute, solar panels, but in finance, there's no substitute to data. And why GBA first? I think GBA to me is like a policy think tank for integrating China with the rest of the world. And we already have quite a few Connect schemes for GBA, such as Wealth Management Connect and some limited extent of Insurance Connect. But all these have to do with client data, company data, and we need to find a way to connect these data flow together. Because again, Leming mentioned in one of his slides that if we can't have cross-boundary flow of data, it creates a lot of operational inefficiency, such as simple activities like KYC. And nowadays, we want to do credit analysis. We may need to look at alternative data. And again, without access to these data, it will really limit the extent we can take advantage of technology nowadays. Because we all talk about fintech. We all know Hong Kong has a vibrant fintech community. And that's definitely one of our core strengths. And in fact, it's not just that. Hong Kong is a leading international financial center. We have a well-established IT infrastructure with strong research and innovation capabilities. And most importantly, being an international financial center, we are already acting as a super connector between China and the rest of the world. So this is why I think it is critical and crucial that we find a way to extend our super connector role into the data space. Because as I said earlier, data drives our finance in future. And just to give you an idea, how well we are in terms of data structure or infrastructure, we already have a very stable and extensive submarine cable connection with the rest of the world to Asia, Europe, and US. And in fact, according to a data center market study recently, Hong Kong is ranked 2nd in Asia and 6th globally as a data hub out of the 50 markets studied in that report. Last but not least, we also need to look at the amount of data that's being generated. According to a United Nations, as of 2021, the report that they did, they found out that in 2022, that's current year, the amount of data we generate globally, internet traffic, that is equivalent to the past, almost 20 years of volume. And they also make a prediction that by 2025, the data that is being generated will be 180 zettabytes, that is 180 trillion gigabytes, from 79 trillion gigabytes 2 years ago in 2021. And guess what? China is one of the biggest data generators, and is forecast to generate roughly 50 zettabytes, that is 50 trillion gigabytes of data, or 27% of the world's data by 2025. And I think these are good enough reasons why we really need to study and find a way to establish Hong Kong as a data super connector, connecting China and the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. King, you highlight a lot about not only the macroeconomic environment, but also how Hong Kong's endowed and earned advantages. Now, perhaps I would like to ask Leming a question. Yeah, he has been devoted pretty much all his career to legal and compliance. And with that kind of background, Leming, can you perhaps elaborate a little bit more about some of the commonly accepted legal approaches to regulate cross-boundary or cross-border data flows? And perhaps you can also share with us some of the key benefits and disadvantages of their approaches.
Thank you, Rocky. As we all know, data-related strategies and policies are influenced by policy objectives and subject to relevant legal and regulatory frameworks, such as privacy protection, economic stability, and national security, so on and so forth, as well as the type of data we are thinking through or are using. There are a few commonly accepted legal approaches to regulate cross-border or cross-boundary data flows, and the jurisdictions may adopt more than one mechanism for the transfer of data across boundaries, borders. especially for handling personal data. For example, there is a so-called whitelist approach where companies are allowed to export data to a receiving country if it is considered having an adequate level of data protection as the data hosting country. For example, EU, the GDPR regulatory framework is deemed most stringent and robust. There's also an approach called safeguards, standard contractual clauses, where data transfers across borders are allowed if contracts featuring standard contractual clauses pre-approved by regulators are signed between the sending and the receiving parties. For example, mainland China, Hong Kong, and the EU. The third example is an approach by certifications, where we also in our recommendation, we looked at that approach, where companies are allowed to transfer and receive data from certain jurisdictions if certain certifications relate to data privacy protection are obtained from a professional body recognized by regulators. For example, this approach, APEX, we use this cross-border privacy rule system. Another data flow mechanism approach is by way of necessity, where most jurisdictions prohibit the international transfer of personal data by default and only permit the transfer of such data for certain purposes, such as for business needs. For example, a performance of a contractual obligation clearly stated in writing. And another sort of a main mechanism for data transfer legal framework that has been followed is by way of a consent. Some jurisdictions require data users to obtain consent from data subjects prior to the transfer of the personal data. For example, both mainland China and Hong Kong would clearly require consent. Now, in terms of their those mechanisms, respective advantages and disadvantages, it is obvious that some data flow mechanisms are more efficient than others, but application and the selection of which mechanism to follow or to be adopted are really limited by data privacy, data security regulations of the sending and receiving jurisdictions. So for example, some of the jurisdictions, data coming from some of the jurisdictions may be subject to much more stringent requirements by one mechanism than where perhaps another mechanism could be more cost efficient and also compliant. So essentially, the way we look at it is jurisdictions may adopt more than one mechanism for transfer of data across boundaries, especially for handling personal data. For example, in mainland China, data users are required to obtain a consent plus government approval, a certification, or a contract with the data recipient, among others, before a transfer of personal data can take place. So that is very cumbersome and the situation we're certainly dealing with. Comparatively, some rare jurisdictions are bound by less legal requirements for the transfer of personal data, such as in the Republic of Korea. Companies are only required to obtain consent from data subjects prior to exporting personal data. So I think the disadvantages and advantages are all sort of relatively relating to different jurisdictions. Thank you, Rocky.
Thanks a lot, Lei Ming. I think that explains why we are trying to shape our recommendations the way that we did. One way is not only to talk about compliance, but also facilitation of business development. The other is really talking about a cost and having the other business considerations put into context. Right, talking about business considerations, Lorena, I'd like to come to you. The question is really because you are coming from a banking sector and you have been devoting much of your career in this regard. Would you be able to share with us some of the pain points or challenges you have encountered due to the insufficient mechanisms or approaches to facilitate a freer flow of data within the Greater Bay Area, for instance? Perhaps if you can, please do give us some examples like the impacts on services and products and whatnot.
Okay. Thank you, Rocky. Am I audible? Yes, excellent. So thank you for having me here. Great to be sharing some of the thinking that we have collectively conducted during the compiling of this paper. So I would like to bring the focus into the data owner. We've been talking a lot about data, the policy that governs the data, the standards, etc. The data owner, which is the customer, be it individuals or SMEs. I think the bottom line is customers would like you, or would at least to feel like you know them well. And that's why Netflix, Amazon, etc., the personalized services and products are always very highly rated. But for any businesses, banking included, to serve a customer to that kind of level, they need to have the data to paint the full picture. And we all know the unique setup of GBA with 3 different jurisdictions with different data security rules and standards, etc. Businesses really struggle and tend to end up having pieces of data from their customers. And it could be a bit of here in Guangzhou, a bit of in Shenzhen, and then Hong Kong, Macau, of course, with very limited ways to piece them back together and then recognize this person is one individual or this is the same SMEs to provide the services. So I think I want to give some quite real life pain points examples. First of all, I think we talked about the importance of understanding a customer's the full picture of a customer with the data so that we can service their financial needs holistically. That's the essence of banking. And let's use wealth management as an example. In the wealth management, let's say a Hong Kong-based financial advisor, they can add so much more value if they could also know what this person's financial situation is, the other side of the border in the mainland GBA part. So that's kind of one. Not knowing the full picture restricts the ability to properly service a customer's full wealth management needs. Secondly, I think with the Greater Bay Area, with the outline, the blueprint, it's very clear it's going to be a vibrant city cluster with loads of opportunities. So we have been seeing the movement of Hong Kong SMEs going to set up business in mainland part of GBA and vice versa. Now, with hopefully the border restrictions relaxing, hopefully very soon, that we can see this taking up even further. But let's just imagine for a minute, one SME, let's say a Hong Kong SME, have been operating in Hong Kong for a very long time, and they built a solid credit history in Hong Kong. But then they decided I need to set up in Dongguan, and they go there to set up a business bank account, and they want to perhaps having some working capital. the Dongguan side of banks will struggle without being able to access the Hong Kong side of all the credit history information to ascertain who are you. You say you're a successful business, but then all these information, it would be so much smoother if the flow could be more freely accessible. And this, I think, also applies to individuals as they move, live, work, etc., within the Greater Bay Area city clusters. To borrow, let's say, to buy a home, the mortgage, it would be difficult in a new city if they could not port the data they have built up in their home city or the city they were in before. Same applies to insurance and all that kind of thing. You got the gist. King earlier mentioned about KYC. I think that's an area that's repeatedly mentioned by industry practitioners as one key pain point. Again, I still want to apply the customer lens. If you have been a customer with one bank in Guangzhou, let's say, for many, many years, and you want to open an account in Hong Kong with the exact same bank, in your eyes as a customer, that's exactly the same bank. But then imagine how you feel. I guess actually we don't need to imagine. Many of us have experienced that. The other bank just treats you as a complete stranger, and then you get frustrated. But it's also super expensive, costly from the bank side to treat you as a stranger, a new customer. The operational cost, the compliance cost, and all that will all mount up. So that's another key pain point as well. And then, as I'm from the banking industry, just last pain point from the bank's perspective then. The lack of a clear and unified governing framework around data in the GBA, as we are pushing for a GBA proposition, let's say, that brings ambiguity. And ambiguity brings uncertainty and hesitancy. So the banks all need to be super mindful of how to coordinate between all these data laws of the three jurisdictions and interpret them to ensure that we're compliant to each of those jurisdictions that we operate in. This sometimes, sometimes might be a bit understatement, always lead to the over-interpretation and the stay on the safe side mindset, which then will inevitably be different from bank to bank. And that leads to discrepancies in the industry. So as a kind of overall top line, I think from a practitioner point of view, these are some pain points that I can think of.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Lorena. I think what you mentioned is extremely helpful to the audience and to us. On the one hand, like we have to think from the customer's perspective, be it on an individual or an entity level. The thing that we want to achieve is to provide a better customer service, just so people will not have to do things repeatedly and perhaps doing things once and for all. Then also it gives an edge to the Greater Bay Area. A clear governing framework in the Greater Bay Area would provide a better value proposition for a region with three jurisdictions and different regulatory and legal frameworks. So I guess that summarizes your key points just now. William now, William is actually sitting right next to me, but William, my next question is for you. Over the last few years, we have seen a proliferation of international regulations on cross-boundary or cross-border data exchange, partly due to the rising concerns over data privacy from regulators and data subjects. Right. At the same time, we have also observed a rising number of new technologies being adopted to support the data storage, sharing, and processing. I know that you have a wealth of experience in this regard, and both in Hong Kong and in many other jurisdictions, not only in the Greater Bay Area, by the way. So perhaps you can share with us some innovative technologies and new developments in the recent years that can be used to facilitate more efficient cross-boundary data sharing. And following up on that question, if I may, I would like to ask you to share your international experience with us. and how, and perhaps address how that can be managed and implemented here in the Greater Bay Area.
So I'll try to answer that, Rick. Thank you. But first of all, let me say, it's been a great pleasure working with the team, and thanks for all your support. So in terms of technology, there's actually a wealth of technologies today to facilitate this share of data. As was discussed earlier, some of the concern is on security, on privacy. And so a lot of it, the solution from a technological standpoint, focus on how to preserve privacy while you share the data. So it's not just about, finding a way of sending data to you faster and so on, but more so on making sure that I maintain the privacy even when I'm sharing data with you. Now, having said that, though, the approach is actually somewhat different depending on the technology. So let me just quickly introduce a few of them. Under AI, there is one stream called federated learning. And effectively what this means is, I don't share data, but I actually get the machine to learn from, specific data set without taking it to a central repository. So this way you are doing it kind of like, in a distributed way, having the system, the module to learn about the attributes of the data, but keeping the data where they are. So it's not about sharing data, it's about getting the system AI to learn the data. Obviously, there's pros and cons about it. There's another approach saying, well, hey, why don't everybody kind of like share encrypted data within that agreed community, and kind of limiting to that and having multiple people working on the data without actually seeing the raw data. So the term is secure multi-party computation. There's another family called homomorphic encryption, enabling system to work on encrypted data set. So you do not need to decrypt it, you keep it encrypted, but you have to work on it. There are other kind of approach, differential privacy, where you actually put some noise in so that, the whoever operates it knows what noise you put in, but other people don't know. And then obviously one stream that is increasingly becoming popular is called zero knowledge proof. You're not sharing something, but you are able to prove that you know something or particular attribute is indeed correct. So, but these all involve cryptographic calculation in one way or another. So technologically, it's actually quite complex. So there is actually another dimension to that, because what we are trying to share, as Lorena was talking about, referring to KYC, so you're talking about identity. So how are you able to share identity, in a kind of open way and everybody agrees to it? Well, very simply, you have an identity infrastructure. So there are actually initiatives today on the identity part of it. So one major initiative is what we call legal entity identifier, and that is under G20. China is part of it. Hong Kong is also part of it. In fact, it kind of covers globally, started with the financial services sector. So a lot of the major financial institutions already have this thing called the LEI code, which is a unique identifier identifying the organization. And the beauty of it is actually run by, the global LEI Foundation, which is, sponsored by the G20 Financial Stability Board. So it has wide acceptance and adoption, and that is something that, can address the corporate identity side. But what about individuals? So in recent years, there is another stream called self-sovereign identity, allowing data owner to take ownership of their attributes and decide what to share and what not to share. But one important thing is it's just not about technology, because often we talk about technology versus governance. And somewhere along the line, you have to trust somebody to actually put in the right data, put in the accurate data, or maintain the data set. So technology is one part of it. The governance infrastructure is also an equally important part.
Thank you, thank you. And perhaps I know you bundle quite a bit of questions, and I wonder if you can elaborate how we can borrow such experience and implement or allow the technologies to be used here in the Greater Bay Area.
Because we are already part of it, for example, REI is already part of it, right? So it's just a matter of adoption.
I see.
So that part is easy. But in terms of some of the technological components, like I mentioned earlier, homomorphic encryption, MPC, and so on, that really depends on whether or not we have the technological establishment, the knowledge, know-how, the setup, because it's actually quite technical and computational heavy. You actually have to have the power to do that, and also having that is just a technology. Again, you have to agree with whoever you are collaborating with to, for example, to define the underlying data schema or having some standard. Otherwise, it doesn't work if you compare apples to oranges.
Understood.
So there's a lot of, the enabling component that you need to work on as well. So again, having dialogue, having the exchange of ideas and sharing the common protocols and so on will actually facilitate in the actual adoption of some of these technologies.
Understood. Thank you so much, William. I was jotting notes as we were discussing. I think there are technologies allowing us to improve the transferability, the workability, and identity of data, or like somewhere along the data value chain. And on top of technology, I think is the importance of governance cannot be neglected. That's perhaps some high level summary. Lorena, I'm coming back to you. Well, there are a governance framework, and obviously working in the bank, banks do have obligations to comply with regulations. So one of our recommendations listed out in the report is to provide clarity on Section 33 of PDPO. While PDPO Section 33 has not been implemented, despite the fact that it was introduced back in 1996. A key reason, or at least a reason, was due to the business concerns in relation to operational impact and compliance difficulties and implications. Right. So why are we still doing this? Why does the working group still come up with the idea that perhaps this is time to take a look at this? Is it extremely important for banks and the other FIs to see such a regulation?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. And actually, we dedicated quite a big section on the PDPO Section 33 in the paper. So for attendees on this call, I would highly recommend you download and read through the paper. But as a summary, I want to call out 2 points. From the industry's point of view, regulatory certainty and clarity is always sought after. It's always welcome, right? This is a highly regulated industry. Like Rocky said, we all need to be compliant, and any changes will have impact on operations, and any changes could actually take a long time to implement across the different FIs in the industry. If, for example, we are now designing a data exchange flow on the premise that Section 33 will not be enforced. Therefore, there's no restriction of data leaving Hong Kong, of course, with customer consent. But then what if this changes next year and Section 33 is to be implemented next year, for example? Then all the entire data flow will need to be changed. And secondly, as also highlighted in the paper, as we really believe there's a real opportunity for Hong Kong to be the financial, not just the financial center, but the financial data center for GBA. To prove the adequacy of Hong Kong playing the facilitator role for the secure and safe flow of data across this GBA region, the city really needs to have the clarity on relevant rules and regulations in the data space. So as a summary, these 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. I think having such a regulatory framework or like some guidance for the industry to follow would be extremely important. William, so China is the second largest digital economy in the world, with the size of market having reached 7.1 trillion back in 2021. According to the China Academy of Information and Communication Technology, while China has also put a very strong emphasis on developing its digital economy and has introduced initiatives to facilitate more effective data flow within the country.
Right.
One of the initiatives is called the Eastern Data, Western Computing project, in which the Greater Bay Area is one of the 8 computing hubs. Could you please share with us what role Hong Kong can play in supporting the development of the digital economy of the entire country of China?
Right. That is a very interesting project. And the concept of Eastern Data, Western Computing was really designed to maximize the value of data through driving insight from the data. Now, how do you achieve that? Well, if I leave it to everyone to analyze their own data, the skill set is actually more spread out. You may not have the data center capacity to do it properly, and so on and so forth. So the notion is let's actually concentrate and focus on some of these areas and develop the talents and the technical capability to do that. So this is achieved by building and leveraging computational power and skills from hardware installation to the softer skills. So in the context of Western computing, that computational power encompasses related technology such as big data, the use of AI, and so on. Operational enablers, including the cloud computing for storage, blockchain, and even down to the computer chip level, because that's where the processing power comes. The soft skill, including capabilities like data scientists and so on. So that is a combination of that. Now, we talked about legal requirements earlier, technological kind of implications and so on. So one of the scenarios that we are looking at is we may no longer be in the situation where we just share raw data directly, but sharing the insight from data. There had been talk about data exchange, is actually buying data, raw data versus buying insight. And these are two very different concepts. So the need for both computational power and analytical capability, the softer skills,
right,
and also because you are doing that remotely, east to west, or Hong Kong connecting with Greater Bay Area, you actually do need the secure communication channel for that. So it's not just computing, it's also the communication lines and so on. So here in Hong Kong, we have the enabling digital communication infrastructure. We have 5Gs and very up-to-date fiber optics and so on to connect with one or more computing hubs. So it's not just the Greater Bay Area. We can connect to multiple hubs. We also have comparable legal infrastructure. The data privacy ordinance that we have and so on, that provides us with that legal backing, and then data protection as well. I understand new laws are being conceived on cybersecurity and computer crime. So these provide us with that legal backing. Now, we have a strong technical security community to protect us from internet incidents, hackings, and so on. And we are also a vibrant hub of economic activities. And there is where we actually can contribute data and our insight of the data. So the reason why it's east and west, because in the eastern part of China, these are all the major cities with economic activities. And so combining different types of insights from different economic activity, Hong Kong is still pretty much global. And so we can actually provide lots of maybe data information insight that may not be directly obtainable from the or able to derive from the China data set. So it's really a collaboration that we can actually facilitate not just the secure sharing of data, but also contribute our own to enhance the overall insight and have that greater pool of data to enrich whatever information that people need to develop their business. So in the context of supporting companies, for example, going abroad, One Belt One Road initiatives and so on, we can provide that particular dimension, which may be, may not be as easy to derive, from commercial operations within mainland China. So by enhancing and hardening our own technological operational capabilities and installing, again, as I said earlier, that governance framework, we can contribute to the bigger scheme, and we can also leverage the computing resources in those major hubs, the Western hubs, for our own benefits. So it will be, a collaboration and hopefully a win-win situation that we can kind of look forward to.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think, William, you highlight, some very important points. As a matter of fact, what we are proposing is riding on our combination of different advantages, right? So it's about our advantages in terms of legal setup or legal framework, and there's also the economic structure. There's the also talent availability, and also different skill sets, right? Like communication and computing skills. So that's extremely important. Now, King, I'm moving closer to the final question to you. As we are all aware, back in August of this year, we have seen that Hong Kong was the selected location for the US PCAOB to conduct auditing on finances of a number of US listed Chinese companies, right? Such an arrangement to many of the industry practitioners is an example of how financial related data could be transferred across the boundaries. So perhaps in your opinion, King, do you feel that there are lessons we can draw from this exercise or arrangement for cross-boundary data flow between the mainland and Hong Kong? Can Hong Kong facilitate data flow between mainland China and perhaps the rest of the world? King, sorry, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello. Hi, sorry. Yeah. That was a great example. Highlighting Hong Kong really is already like a data superconnector because we adopt common law and we have conformed to all the international standards in terms of professional practices, accounting, legal, and also our infrastructure, financial market infrastructure. So all the ingredients are there. Right. So this PCAOB and CSRC agreement using Hong Kong as a place for doing the cross-boundary audit is very important. You highlighted a very subtle difference because the data, these auditing data, is being ported across the boundary to Hong Kong, but not outside of the country. So it's not a border, and that's exactly what this paper is trying to highlight, the uniqueness of Hong Kong. For sensitive data, we can keep it within the country and yet allow foreign jurisdiction, parties, and regulators to come and make use of this data for various regulatory or other business purposes. But at the same time, we provide a connectivity that no other city can replace. And that, again, I want to summarize by highlighting Hong Kong is really a superconnector in every sense of the word. Hopefully, we can bring data into this superconnectivity in not too distant future. Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing you again in our next industry exchange series. Thank you.